Hello there, my friend, and welcome to the Ayurveda and Psychology podcast. I am Charlotte Skogsberg, your host for this podcast. I am enchanted to meet and to take you with me on this journey into the human psyche, viewed from the holistic approach of yoga and Ayurveda, and viewed from the modern man approach of clinical psychology and psychoanalysis. So have something nice to drink next to you, maybe a cup of tea, have a seat, or go out for a nice walk in nature maybe. Enjoy. So today I wanted to talk about our tendencies when it comes to personality types. We are talking on Ayurveda, and if you have not yet listened to the episode that just presents Ayurveda and the doshas, then maybe go back and listen to that one first before you listen to this one that will focus on the doshas, but more specifically on the personality types than the body types. So, as you may remember, there are 3 doshas, 3 constitutions, 3 body types, and therefore 3 personality types as well. Now, these personality types will also govern you, and when you are getting out of balance, it is very often on the level of the personality type that we will notice the first signs of imbalance. Why is this? Because the personality is part of the subtle body, and imbalance begins in the subtle, and then as we let it manifest in the subtle, it then presents itself on the manifested level as well, so on the physical level. But the first step then is actually more on the level of the mind, so on the level of your thoughts and on the level of your emotions. You might have noticed already yourself that when you put something into action, it begins with a thought that might trigger an emotional state that will trigger for sure a thought as well. Once we let this thought and emotion govern us, we will then take an action that links us to what the thought created inside of us. Now, this is how we can see as well this link that's so obvious and so beautiful between the Western psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, psychology, and the Eastern approach, which is so much more hands-on and really beautiful, therefore, because it seems so easy, even if we make it so complicated. So what I wanted to do today was to present to you what early stages of imbalance looks like for each and one of the 3 doshas, speaking of the personality. So we're not even talking yet about what your body looks like and what constitution suits you, but we're really talking about what your tendencies in your personality are. You will most probably notice as well that all 3 tendencies will correspond to you, but there will be one that is most likely to have been present all through your life, from childhood up until adulthood, and there will also be one where you really feel that you recognize yourself more than the other. So what we'll begin with today is to talk about Vata, and then Peta, and then Kapha. And also what I wanted to mention is to make sure that you stay with me to the end of this episode, where I will also present to you in what way we can counter these tendencies, because the knowledge, or let's say the power, lies in the knowledge. So by knowing, you will be much quicker in detecting, and the quicker you detect, the easier it is to counteract or to reverse, of course, just like anything. So let's begin with the typical Vata type of personality and what imbalance early on looks like here. Now, Vata is air and movement and ether, it's lightness, okay? So what an early type of imbalance looks like in Vata is that we find it really hard to focus, okay? There are too many thoughts at the same time, yet we find it hard to put two together in order to form a proper sentence. We are all over the place, yet we're never really anywhere. It will even look like I have something that I want to find a solution for, and on my computer I have 150,000 tabs open on my browser, but I have not actually taken the time to sit down and to properly look at a single one of them. If there would be a word, or let's say an expression for the Vata type, and especially the Vata type imbalance of personality, I guess I would like to use the word of overthinker, right? It's the overthinker. The activity is very present in the mind and far from being present in the rest of the body. We might not even feel our body, really. We find it really difficult to be still. We're moving around. And this idea of not being able to really think straight will bring us into worry. It will make us more worried than angry, for instance, which would be another type of tendency. No, we would be worried, and that would make us even more confused. So confusion is definitely a part of an early stage imbalance of Vata. Now, what we have a tendency to do then is to go in the direction of this tendency, which means to aggravate it. When we aggravate it, what do? It is we're trying to find a way out of this state. We will then tend to go for a run. We will tend to move around. We will tend to try to find a new thing to do, which might be, all right, why am I feeling so confused, or why can't I concentrate? I'm going to try to find a solution, maybe online. So coming back to that idea of all the tabs open on my browser, but then I can't really take in any of the information. All right, so it's confusion, it's a high energy. That's really what we have that feeling, especially if we're someone else together looking at a Vata person. We would feel, oh my God, there's high energy here. It's really high, and we might even make other people feel quite anxious. Now, Vata is very intelligent, just like the other ones, but it has a specific intelligence which is quite creative conceptually. All right, so this is also why when we go towards imbalance, it can be hard for the Vata person to realize to begin with, because they're so in their thoughts, and all that they notice is that they're not seeing things clearly. Usually they see things very clearly, they're very sharp in imagining a project, for instance, or just being really creative in that sense. And what they will try to do then when they begin to be out of balance, before they realize that this is the case, is that they will increase more and more the activity, the movement, by anxiously trying to find a solution, trying to grasp something that will make them see things clearly again. So can you see how this is then going in that same tendency that the actual dosha has, which means that it will make it faster moving, dry it out even more, and moving further away from balance. Now, when it comes to the Peta personality type, we are also on quite a lot of movement and lightness. If you remember, Peta is fire contained in water. So naturally, the fire side to it makes it light and moving. The water part of it, which is a very small part, but still it's there, brings a little bit more of heaviness in and makes it more sticky. Okay, so the fire side will create in a Pitta personality a very forward-thinking, strong focus, all right? Fiery people, basically. Leaders, very often, when it comes to the corporate world. They have a goal and they go for it. They know what they're doing. They're very good at making lists so that they know exactly what is the next step. They're also very kind of drawn to the idea of controlling. So, naturally, due to these things, a Pitta person out of balance is not only someone who finds it hard to, or will take time to realize that they're out of balance, but will most probably reject the idea if it comes from someone else. What does an early stage of Pitta imbalance look like? Well, there are many things that we will find in this, and one of them, of course, is the overall hunger that seems to be all the time. Okay, so for instance, one very typical and good way to see imbalance in Pitta is if you keep waking up in the morning feeling hungry. Now, naturally, if you're on some kind of fast or you haven't eaten for 24 hours, you will feel hungry, of course. But it also means that your Pitta is very, very active because it's empty and the fire is burning and it's yearning for fuel. So, waking up very hungry is a typical sign of Pitta imbalance, early Pitta imbalance. Of course, things like acid reflux, ulcers, things like that are also signs, but they are actually when it's already been around for a while. More mentally, the whole idea of Pitta and the focus also brings then the control and frustration, anger, jealousy quite strongly into early signs of imbalance. If the overall Vata tendencies and imbalances are very high up in the mind, the Pitta ones are quite focused to our solar plexus and to our belly side in the sense that it's the heated fire. It can even be things like really warm scalp, for instance, if you feel really warm in the scalp, and also the insides of your hands and the soles of your feet. Heat here is definitely a sign of an early imbalance. You might also notice light sleep, for instance, waking up at 3 a.m. with the complete sensation that you have finished your night and it's impossible to go back to sleep. I didn't mention it on Vata, but Vata has, of course, a tendency of insomnia as well, just like Pitta. It usually just manifests early on instead, which means that Vata imbalance would be, I'm finding it impossible to even make myself fall asleep at night. The Pitta might actually be exhausted, so falling asleep, but then waking up instead at 3 a.m. Impossible to go back to 3 a.m. Now, the light sleep in the Pitta imbalance will often then make the person even more agitated and heated, which will then make them want to go towards the tendency. So what will that be? Well, the tendency will then be to move around, doing heated practices, going for a run, going to the gym. And there might be a bit of that, I am supposed to be able to do this usually. Why am I not capable of training the way I usually do? The comparison. And if I said that for Vata, an expression for the imbalance on the personality type would be the overthinker, then for the Pitta person, well, I would say the overachiever. So what the Peta person wants to do is we want to overachieve. We want to push through even more. And it might even aggravate just that the thoughts are starting to notice that because we are feeling depleted, because that's actually what happens with the Peta person, that makes us angry and frustrated. The same way the Peta would probably get quite worried. The Vata would get worried. The Peta will more get angry and frustrated, realizing that they're not achieving the results that they usually do. So that's quite a typical way that we begin to notice the imbalance early on for Peta. And then we come, of course, to the Kapha type of person. Okay, so Kapha personalities are quite the opposite to the other two. The other two have definite similar tendencies because they're quite light and because they are always in movement, like the wind and the fire. Now the Kapha, which is, if you might remember, earth contained in water. So it's stagnation instead. And if the other two have these tendencies to overdo, the tendency for stagnation is then to accumulate instead. So to do the opposite. And I was mentioning the expression that comes to mind for me when I think of early imbalance. It would be, for instance, overthinking for Vata or overachieving for Peta. And I would say that for Kapha, we are more in the idea of boredom. But I would even say, actually, that before boredom even comes in, there's the rationalizing things instead. So I'm rationalizing why I should not get out of the state that I'm in. There's no use, for instance. That will not make it better. And it's just better to do this instead. I'll do it tomorrow. To postpone as well is a very good word to put on the Kapha type of personality. The Kapha imbalance on the mental state is therefore to become even more still. It's stillness. And what comes to mind for me as a quite typical moment where Kapha begins to go out of balance, it is when everything around me in my external environment is inviting me to stay still and inside because there's not much stimulation going on. So one thing that comes to mind is the typical end of the week kind of Sunday feeling that most of us probably have experienced at some point, whether it's Sunday or whether it's another day of the week where we have our non-activity happening. So we can then have an excuse, maybe, especially if it's the day of the week where there's nothing open outside or anything to do, and maybe even the weather is not very inviting, to rationalize, to stay in, to be still, and maybe just watch TV all day instead. While we're doing this, we might then begin to feel emotions of loneliness and isolation because, well, we're basically being inside on our own in stillness, and that will feed on thoughts going in that same direction. And we will then maybe have a tendency to reach for something that will comfort us. Something in a Kapha nature, like ice cream, like sweets, like something that is cold and sweet, or even fruit for that matter, actually. Very sweet fruit, like mangoes or something that's full of water and really, really sweet. Now, the more we go into and I'm going to use the ice cream example because I feel like that's more extreme and therefore more obvious. So if I'm sitting in front of the TV watching some kind of rom-com, right, and I'm eating ice cream, my motivation and inspiration will also have a tendency to go down, to decrease. And what is really difficult when it comes to the Kapha type of personality is that in order to reverse that, we actually need to move, because you might have noticed yourself when you have a tendency to feel sadness, for instance, or you're just feeling tired and kind of beginning to have those negative thoughts about nothing is going to change. If you actually do make yourself go out for a walk, for a brisk walk in nature, you will notice that that will actually change. So this is where I want to then talk to you about the very simple ways that we can take action when it comes to early stages of imbalance on our personality tendencies. So this means that what we want to do, imbalance means that we're gone too far in one extremity, and to then come back to balance means to counter that with the opposite quality. Okay, so what this means is that for the Vata person, the tendency will be to move around and to get worried and to move even more and to search even more and to just become more and more actually dried out through that. So we want to slow down, we want to warm up, and we even want to moisture a little bit. One very simple thing to do is to just simply close off all external stimulation, because we are in the mind with our Vata, which means that we need to still the mind, we need to switch off all stimulation coming into the mind, okay? We need to close everything off and then make the body be still and warm and comfortable. So for instance, something as simple as meditation, sitting still, eyes closed, in a comfortable position, wearing comfortable clothing, and simply bring our attention to one thing very simple as the breath. That is one very good way to counter the imbalance in Vata. Now, what will happen, of course, is that you will have the impression that this increases the mental activity, and it's going to become very hard to stay. It doesn't actually increase the activity of the mind, it simply makes it more apparent. So those thoughts will still be there when you're moving around. It's just that you're not noticing them. They're just making you more and more imbalanced. So what we want to do is to allow for that to happen. And we want to just relax into it. And we might even afterwards, after a nice and long meditation, journal a little bit to bring them down. So when we journal, we want to prepare ourselves a nice and warming, quite creamy drink. Like, for instance, a nut milk that we warmed up and added some warming spices to, like cinnamon, like cloves, like ginger, and we sweeten it out a little bit as well to make it nice and yummy and warming. So that's a simple way to just bring your Vata down. When it comes to Peta, what we want to do, and this is really hard for any type of A-type personality that Peta is, we actually just need to stop. Stop moving, stop heating, and cool down instead. Now, one of the things that we can do is that we can do exactly like the Vata, for instance, sit down, meditate on it. We might journal on it afterwards. But one of my really ideal ways of calming my Peta is to actually go out into nature, and then ideally into a nature where we will have quite a lot of the green and the blue, for instance, around us, because those are actually really nice and cooling colors. And we go for a very gentle, without let's say a goal, without a direction specifically, walk. We will not listen to music, we will not listen to a podcast, we will not try to be productive. We're strolling. We're doing for the sake of doing without an expected result. This might look like going out for a walk if you have a park, if you have a forest, somewhere ideally away from the busyness of a town, a city. Okay? and we walk around without anything but nature as our stimulation. And we might just observe anything that is blue and green around us. Okay, that's a really nice way to begin cooling down Peta. Another thing that is also very difficult for us to do, for most of us, I guess, for all tendencies, is to stop the heating that actually screens bring us. So that's phones, naturally, laptops, TV, whatnot. Okay? I know that it's hard, but it means that, especially when you come home from work or whatever it might be, to not start looking at your phone, to not switch on Netflix or whatever it is, but to instead maybe take a book out. Or if you feel like you need to do something with your hands, be occupied with something, find any kind of creative output as well, like writing, like painting, drawing, on paper ideally. All right. And then when we, one of the things as well that I would like to mention for the overheating Peta, which has to do with the hunger, is to calm the hunger down with things like a green juice, for instance. All green vegetables have quite cooling effects on us. And so sometimes when we get these cravings because we are aggravated in our Peta, drinking a green juice will actually help. Because Peta will have, they all have, I guess, to a certain extent, but Peta will have this tendency to overeat if they are very aggravated because they're always hungry. So drinking a green juice or a green smoothie can be a really good way to help the Peta to slow down. Or grape juice. Grape juice. Now the thing is with grape juice, if we buy it, is that it usually contains quite a lot of sugar. Okay, when we buy it in the store. But I find that even the ones that I buy that are the cheap ones with obviously sugar in it, I still feel that it helps me. So it's sweet. Sweet is good for calming Peta as well. It's just that we don't want to overdo it on the sugar, because when we overdo it on the sugar, of course, we're heating ourselves up as well. When it comes to the Kapha people, this one is not easy. To make someone move that doesn't want to move, you know it yourself, that's not easy. But it is then to remember that we need to reverse the tendencies as early as we notice them. So this might be waking up on a Sunday, feeling a little bit, out of it, a little bit weary, not really happy, and maybe not really having anything planned for the day. It might be bad weather outside. It might be a really Kapha weather, like in fall, autumn, winter and spring in the Northern Hemisphere typically. There will be a lot of those Sundays where it's quite dark and moist outside, dark and cold. So it is to know that straight away and to get out of bed early, right? 6 a.m. Ideally, it doesn't matter if it's dark. And then begin by making small, gentle movements. If you're not used to movement, it can be anything but like just putting on your favorite tune and gently dance to that. Or it can be something like, I'm going to clean, So getting up early and do some movement straight away. Ideally, something that I would find perfect would be to have warm water with ginger and lemon, and then go for a brisk walk outside really early on. As soon as it's quite nice and light out, we want to get out and go for a brisk walk. That's a really good way to begin to reverse the tendency of Kapha imbalance. All right. I hope that these little ideas helps you. Do let me know. And as always, remember that it's the person sitting there who's interested in knowing everything that you want to share. You can always simply comment or email me. I love that. Email me at charlotte@yogisha.com, or even send me a message on social media, Yogisha, as well, on Instagram. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to this podcast and this episode. I am very grateful. If you enjoyed this and you think that other people could enjoy this, please help me to spread the word. Share this episode on any channel that you have of social media or messaging. And even more so, I would really appreciate if you know one other person who might benefit from my words today specifically. Take that 1 minute it takes to simply share this episode with one person. Remember that there's a human being on the other side of your phone, of your earpods, of this microphone. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what I've been talking about. So please leave a comment. Send me a message directly if you wish. This is Charlotte. This is me. See you next time. Namaste.